Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the series finale of The Vampire Diaries, the latest episode of Grimm, as well as the latest episode of Sleepy Hollow. Like always, if I'm talking about something that you want to listen to, you can always look in the description down below. I include the time when I start talking about each of the respective shows. So for example, if you want to hear what I had to say about the series finale of The Vampire Diaries, you can skip to what I had to say about this week's episode of Grimm, as well as Sleepy Hollow. But the first thing I'm going to talk about is the series finale of The Vampire Diaries. First of all, I will just go right out and say, I love the finale. Obviously, it was going to be a more emotional thing, so I wasn't expecting some big, gigantic battle, but it was still a very good closing on a story, and I won't lie to you, I got teary. I'm not afraid to admit it. I was tearing up, dude. That episode got me hard. I was like, nah, fight back your tears, Michael. Fight them back. Everyone else is crying. You're not going to cry. You're not going to cry just because everyone else is crying. I can't help but start crying because it was so beautiful. It was so good. Obviously, not everything I thought panned out, but nevertheless, I really kind of break it down to episode, and run through it and just be like, okay, this, and that. So, first of all, the reason why Vicky's doing all this, it turns out, her main reasoning is because it's she doesn't want to go back to hell. She's like, if she burns all of this, then she goes along with the town when it ignites. And so it's for her, it means she'll ultimately die and kind of screw the town that kind of forsaken her in a sense. It's not her home. And if she does this, Catherine kind of gives her an out of hell. It's there's no other way out of hell for her. So for her, Vicky's this is my one shot to kind of get away from it all. It's just, I'm tired of this life. It's just, not tired of this life, but life in hell is just too much for her. So she's just do whatever it takes. Yeah, you can't really trust Catherine, but at least in this scenario, she knows she's doing this and she's going to die from it. She just wants it now. Which, there was that beautiful moment where she had that talk with Peter, where Peter was like, I'm not trying to stop you. I just want to see my daughter one last time, because I thought Peter wasn't around when Vicky was born. I thought Vicky was born after he had already left, but I guess he was around long enough for her to see her when she was younger. Because it was kind of interesting, because she immediately was like, Dad? So I was like, oh, that just kind of threw me by surprise, but then I guess that kind of makes sense, I guess. But, everyone's setting up their goodbyes and everything. There was a whole situation of after obviously Catherine had kidnapped Elena, and I love that moment she pops up and she's like, oh hey, it's me. It's because Bonnie had previously run into her when she was dreaming when she was quote unquote dying, and Enzo was like, yo, it's not your time to die, love, because Elena's Bonnie, this isn't right. You're supposed to be old, have your own family, your own life, and then it's my time to wake up. But it's you're supposed to live your life first. This isn't right. You have to go back. And Enzo was like, yeah, it's not your time. But it's they were like, oh, maybe she woke up because she ran into Bonnie and everything. The moment I saw her, I was it's Catherine dressed up like Elena just to screw with you, isn't it? And it turns out to be the case. Just because she's very vindictive and just loves she's always loved playing mind games. And that's what made this whole finale the best. It's because she thought she'd win it in. She was thinking oh, I'm going to burn this town with every single one of you in it. Because Kai did one last thing before he was locked up, and he put essentially I guess the word would be enchantment on Elena, making it so that where they hid her body in the boiler room, she couldn't leave there. Once again, Kai doing a douchebag thing before he gets screwed over both times. Because the first time he did the whole Elena and Bonnie situation before, later on you have Damon knocking his head off, and now we have this situation. Luckily, he's paying for it because he's locked up for all eternity, stuck by himself, and like Bonnie said, unlike the Gemini prison, there's no loophole or way for him to get out. He's trapped there forever, so always alone, never having anyone else. But it comes down to the situation of everyone's got to find Elena before time's up. Caroline wants to stay behind because she's Damon won't go. She definitely knows Damon won't go. She knows Stefan won't leave without his brother. Which Rick is no, you need to come with me because you know better than anyone what it's like to lose a mom and how hard that can be. Because it's I don't want my girls to grow up without a mom. Which part of me is that was a little dickish of you to play that move. But it's it's just because you legitimately don't want your girls to grow up without a mom. And you just because you do care about Caroline and you want her to come with you. But it's also at the same time, even if it wasn't because he doesn't want her to do so, it's put your family first. Your girls kind of come first. You're kind of putting someone else first. Which is that's kind of who Caroline is and who she's always been. She has a very big heart. She's a very empathetic person, and the fact is that it's especially when it's the people she cares about, she will go above and beyond for them. And it's in this particular case, even if it wasn't about Damon, even if it wasn't about Stefan, she still would have stayed behind because Elena was one of her best friends, and she would have bent over backwards just to try and do whatever she could to help her. But at the same time, like I said, you do get where Lark comes from. And he's even talking to Bonnie later on. He's like apologetic. He's like, I do care about Elena and Damon. It's just, and even Bonnie's like, no, I understand. Like, it's a tough position because Alaric's got to look out for his little girls. He wants to help Elena and he wants to help Damon because it mean a lot to him. Obviously, him and Damon have obviously had their issues most recently because, his children getting kidnapped and everything. But, obviously they kind of settled that beef to a certain extent. But more so, it was just kind of like, it's a tough situation. The people you care about versus the other people you care about. It's like his little girls kind of have to come first. And that's kind of something he was trying to get Caroline to see, which, ultimately Caroline was like, I promise you, Rick, I'd have to go back. And Stefan's like, okay, it's okay. You have to go. She's like, but no. It's like, no. In this situation, family kind of came first before Stefan has to go back to get Damon. She has to go back to a little girl because it's like, yes, they love each other. And it's like, yes, they are family too. But it's like, she knows this is something she has to do for the sake of her little girls because it is something like, even at her age, it was hard enough losing her mom. She can't imagine them losing the only other mom they know. They already lost their biological mom, Jo, and they never really got to know her. Obviously, as they got older, I'm sure Alaric told him a lot about her. But, especially, they're growing up, thinking of Caroline as their mom, and it's like, definitely wouldn't be right not having her around, so... Because also, when you actually think about it, the fact of the matter is because they also are super young. So it's like Caroline losing her mom already hit her hard. I mean, because Caroline should have had a lot more time with her mom than she did because that whole situation and stuff. But that, obviously that was for character development and just like putting a hardship in. And it wasn't just like some supernatural hardship. It was just like a natural hardship in life that was like hit Caroline the way it did. So, but obviously with this situation, her girls are younger too. So it would have hit them a lot harder. But what really got me was like, okay, Bonnie's got the decision. She's going to hold back the Hellfire and basically destroy Hell because it's like they're going to, when the bells ring, she's going to fight back the fire and she's going to send it back into Hell and basically destroy it. But there was a situation of like, it came down to Damon and Stefan. One of them is going to have to stay behind and make sure that Catherine stays dead so that she's in Hell when Hell goes kaput. Because that way they can make sure she's gone forever. There's no like ever having to worry about her coming back. But then it turns into the conversation of like, yo, we need redemption. Both of us have made mistakes in our lives. Damon's made mistakes. Stefan's made a mistake. He's like, especially lately. He's like, those things that happened weren't your fault. Especially like Enzo. He's like, no, you want to keep saying that, Damon, but it was my fault. I've got to make up for a lot of stuff of my life. I made you into a vampire and like all that's on me. And it's like the fact of the matter is he's like, I need you to be here for Elena because you are the big brother. You basically became the brother I've always been proud of. Like, this is the brother I knew you could be, and it's like I'm not gonna like squander that chance because I'm human and I'm not gonna you have a lifetime ahead of you, being a vampire and everything. Me, I've got a couple years left in me, like 60 or so, and eventually I die anyway, so it's like, why not give this opportunity to you? Which Damon does the thing. I was like, he's like, you're right, brother, I am a vampire, you did forget about that, and compels him to leave. I'm like, dude, because ultimately I had the feeling, just because the nature of the show is like, I had the feeling if not both of them, at least one of them was going to go like in this finale. And I was just like, who's it going to be? It was like, especially when they're having that conversation, it's like, this isn't a competition of who needs redemption more. And it's just, it was such a heartbreaking situation because it's like, it has to come down to you. And it's like, Stefan wanted to stay, but it's like, oh, Damon forced him away. Or at least we thought, because then we get the extra twist where it's like, oh yeah, Damon didn't think I'd have Verbain in my system being human now. And so he went back, getting the blood from his own system. He makes Damon into a human to stop him, and he sacrifices himself. I'm like, no! What? I was like, oh, dude, because Caroline's leaving him a message being like, oh, Stefan, I want you to know I love you. It's like, don't worry, Caroline, he's got your message, and he's on his way to you. You just don't know it yet. And it's like finding out that twist. It's like, no! I mean, granted, later on you find out that he did hear the message because he tells Elena to tell Caroline when she wakes up, tell her that I'll love her forever too. And I'm like, dude, that sucks. Because ultimately I didn't want neither one of them to die. Because it's like, Stephen just got married. It's like, oh, they're happily ever after, and it's like I wanted both of them to survive. Legitimately, though, was thinking that like one of them was going to die in this. Why? Because that's just the nature of how finales go. It's just like not everyone's going to make it out of it okay. But, now we have a situation where Elena's awake because Bonnie finally broke the spell. And you have Damon being human now, so him and Elena can grow old together. And basically, it's just everyone's lives trying to figure out where they go from here, or where their lives. I like the little cleanup, like basically running through everyone else's lives. The fact is that you have Matt being sheriff, could basically kind of get everyone's diaries. Like, because there's a lot, well, really quickly, before I kind of get onto that, got to give mad props to Bonnie for handling that Hellfire situation. It's just like, she's like, I can't do this on my own. And so it's like, you're not alone. Her Grams showed up, and then one of her ancestors, the one that was connected to the whole, like, Maxwell family situation where Mystic Falls originally started, and there were those other witches behind them. I only assume that they're from the Bennett bloodline as well. I could be wrong. They could just be witches in general, but I think more so than anything, it makes sense for it to be all Bennett witches from the past and stuff coming together to stop the Hellfire, which was pretty impressive. I just love it. Just Bonnie and her family just standing there in front of like that great wall of fire, dude, and it's like, holy crap. I was kind of halfway expecting the bell, like the fire when it goes back into the bell, for it to explode or shatter or something, but it's like, no, it's still intact. I mean, I'm sure when it was all said and done, they broke that down and broke that apart, smelted. They had to do something to it. But getting back to it, you have a rundown of everybody's lives, and you also have people watching over them. For obviously Matt, he's got his sister, he's got Vicky and Tyler, because it's not exactly what I thought before, because previously I was like, okay, when Bonnie dies, she will sacrifice herself, is kind of what my thought was, and it'd be a situation where she creates kind of this form of the afterlife, and where everyone will kind of end up afterwards, which kind of happened to a certain extent, but it's more so like just a natural afterlife, some form of peace. And you have Vicky and Tyler watching over Matt. And hopefully things between him and his dad continue. Like, obviously they still had each other at the end of all this, so maybe hopefully they were able to completely repair their relationship. It's kind of the hope there. And then when it came to Alaric and the girls, you see Joe watching it, and it's like that beautiful moment. It's just like they're there, they can kind of feel their presence, but they can't interact with them. So it's not like a true other side like before, like they're there watching. It's more so like a situation of like, I guess, a last little glimmer of them before they fully pass on to 100% peace, kind of the afterlife or heaven, whatever there is for them. And for Caroline, it was her mom. I was just like, I also love the fact is, obviously, we get a little look at Jeremy, because basically the school is being run by. I was like, okay, you gotta have a little side note of some other. I was wondering, like, you had to at least include something and be like, yo, where he's at. So him and Dorian are helping out with the school. I also love the little note from Klaus, because basically he made a contribution, and then Caroline's kind of like, huh. And then, but I think it was like, who was it? I think it was it Matt? No, I think it was Alaric. Somebody was kind of doing the voiceover for that, and they're like, yeah, but that's a tale for another time. I'm like, So, obviously, that's them kind of alluding to the fact that things kind of work out for Klaus. Side note, I was listening to the preview. Apparently, that's a 5-year jump. I thought it was just a pure 3-year jump. So, I'm guessing it's like the 3-year timeline to the Vampire Diaries and a little bit beyond. I guess because they wanted to do it like that, so it's like we have more establishment of like what happens to everyone. So like everything that's happened in the Vampire Diaries has definitely already happened by the time the stuff in the originals happened. I guess that's the point they're trying to get across. Kind of sworn they said 3 years before, but maybe they always kept saying 5 and I just misinterpreted. Maybe I just wanted to hear 3 years, so I just heard 3. Nevertheless. But that was just kind of interesting. I probably need to go back and just reread that note just for the sake of knowing what it says. I mean, granted, obviously the originals is most likely going to cover that. But obviously, it's kind of a spoiler for the originals to be like, oh, things have to work out for Klaus and his family in some shape or form. But nevertheless, then you have Bonnie still having Enzo watch over her. She's doing what she promised. She's like, I'm going to live my life to the fullest. Him still watching over her and everything. I'm surprised nothing ever came about it. Her taking that blood or anything, the blood of him that he put in that necklace. I'm guessing it's just a reminder she probably kept around to remind her of Enzo. Never did anything about it. But at the very end, obviously, you have Elena and then Damon walking. It's like, because Damon was always worried that like he'd never see Stefan again. It's like, oh, Stefan went to the other place. Me, I'm definitely going to hell. But Caroline had told him previously, I was like, don't be so sure about that. And you have that moment at the very end where it's like Elena and Damon kind of get separate, but then Elena looks, her aunt's there, her mom's there, her dad, obviously her adoptive parents, but then also like her real dad, David there. It's like, ah! Especially because I recently saw the previews of iZombie. I saw them once and I've never looked at them because I want to see more than I need to. Didn't see any Blaine in there, but nevertheless, it's not important. It's just like, I'll see, oh, that was so good. I guess they couldn't get Mia, I can never pronounce Mia's last name. I think it's Kirshner, but I could be completely saying that wrong because that's her biological mom. But still, it was a very beautiful sentiment. And then at the very, very end, you have Damon and Stefan hugging it out. So they kind of came together. And after, like I said, the afterlife situation happened, but it wasn't necessarily what I thought it was going to be. I mean, I also love that little moment, like after Stefan had said his goodbyes to Elena, he walks out the door, and then who's waiting for him but his bestie Lexi. So didn't mean for that to come out. I was going to say like best friend, but I came out I did not mean for that to rhyme. That was actually unintentional. But it's such. Like I said, I knew it was never going to be anything big. I knew it was going to be more so than anything. Closing chapters being a very emotional thing, which it was. A very beautiful ending. And I do love the fact is that when it ends on the end credit, it's a white background instead of the black background it has always been. Except for, didn't it have a white background at the end of season 5? I think, when Bonnie and Damon were stuck on the other side when it was disappearing. I think when it ended, like the big flash, I'm pretty sure that had a white background ending. So nevertheless, a very, just so good, such a good ending. Like I said, to me, it looked like, there is some form of an afterlife in it, so I'm glad that they're establishing it. Kind of coinciding it's kind of like Lost, but I'm sure it's a situation where a lot of people would like this ending a lot better than Lost, because Lost had a very emotional ending too. That's what these two endings kind of represent, because they kind of set up an afterlife. But the exception is like, Vampire Diaries, there's no like big grand mystery. Also, there's that side note reveal where Catherine was like, yeah, the reason why Kay chose you two specifically was because it was me. Also makes you wonder how far back that went. Was it even a situation where it's like, could it have been like Kate's the one that told Sybil to even choose Damon in the first place? Because it seemed like she was the one whispering. It's like, because it does make you wonder why he was so accepting of the whole situation. I mean, obviously he gave his reasons as to why, like, oh, like I was behind, like I chose Stefan because of the fact that he's a Ripper and everything. So, but it seems like she had a hand in that. I mean, granted, who knows how much she's influenced, like, Kate's decisions going forward. Like, I keep forgetting, like, wasn't her whole situation in season 5, or was that season 6? That was season 5, right? Her going to hell and everything. But nevertheless, like I said, I'm sad to see this ending. I have to go back and rewatch this. Like I said, hopefully Netflix keeps it on up there for a little while. Because CW has this weird thing where it puts stuff up there on Netflix like really quickly. Like something else recently, I don't remember what it was. Like the new season of something else got put up there pretty quick. I definitely know the final season of Beauty and the Beast got up there like really quick. I think it was a lot of its newer shows got put up there like a week or so after they finished. I'm like, that's a quick turnaround. CW must have some like pretty tight deal with Netflix or something. So I just can't stress it enough of how good this is. And like I said, that beautiful moment, just like it's over, but at the same time, that sad moment of it's over. I didn't catch any of the extra stuff at the beginning. I should have. I had an opportunity, but I was just sidetracked by other stuff. The thing we're just kind of running through the entire series. The cast is saying their goodbyes and everything. So, a beautiful series. If you're a fan of the show, I highly recommend you go tell someone else about the show. Have them binge on it, or rewatch the show with someone else that you like that might like it. Because I've loved this show from the very beginning. I'm sad to see it go, but I'm glad for it to be a situation where the show has a proper ending. Whereas, I've said it countless times before, I will always prefer a final season over a show being canceled and its previous season before it got canceled being labeled, oh, this was the final season. I want to be like, this is the final season. Go into it that way. You can see that the story is tailored to lead this all to an end. So, not the end I was expecting. Obviously, I got some bits here and there right as I've theorized on how this might all end. But even that, well, really the right word would be predicted, but not theories, because I don't want to get all technical about it. So, but like I said, in some hopes, the show will continue in some shape or form with the originals. Obviously not directly, but there's still a lot that the show could pull from. It does make you wonder, like, because even the main cast, they come, like, I feel Matt, maybe, but it's like Damon's human now, Stefan's going. I mean, there's always the Caroline situation, but it seems like the way they're phrasing it, it looks like that notes the first connection between Klaus and Caroline, so makes you wonder how any of them are going to feel about how everything turned out in this episode. Like I said, because I'm curious to see if that hell situation ever affected anything in the originals. They might not bother doing that because it might get things a little too convoluted to like tie everything together like that. Because I'm sure there's a lot of people that have connections to the originals that could easily be in hell, like Finn, for example. But like I said, that might complicate things. It might turn around and be like turn into something soon. But like I said, with the whole like 5-year gap situation, I don't know. I mean, granted, how long has it been between season 7 and season 8 of, the Vampire Diaries? I think it only been like a couple months since like Enzo and Damon went on their thing with Sybil. I think that was only a couple months, so it's not like it's been a really long time. Because that's what I was wondering, is that where the extra 2 years went between the seasons? But I don't think that's the case. I mean, maybe it was, and maybe I'm just not remembering correctly, but nevertheless, this is, I don't know, that's really all I kind of had to say about that. So I'm just going to end this here with the Vampire Diaries and say that I hope to talk to you guys some more about the originals, because I'm super excited to see how that all plays out, especially after, saying goodbye to one and saying hello to another, just in the long run of things. So, yeah, I'm going to stop here, so sorry. And now moving on to this week's episode of Grimm. So this episode was actually kind of a pretty sad one. I'd probably go as far as saying, like, I personally think it's like one of the most saddest episodes of Grimm, because it's very, like, I feel like Grimm has had some in the past, but I mean, at least to my knowledge, this seems like the most grounded episode, just because what the basic situation is in this episode is obviously you have two different cases that are actually connected. One is that basically there's this orderly named Mason. Apparently he attacked one of the people he's in charge, and it's an older lady. But basically she has dementia. She was talking about the fact that she loved running through the woods. And the fact is that she remembered the taste of blood on her mouth, and she didn't remember where she was at that time. So she vogued and attacked him. He panicked and was defending himself. But then she later on turns up dead. There's a whole situation behind that. And now, well, you end up finding out, because from Rosalie and Monroe, that there's actually this whole Godfather of Death situation. Essentially, there's a Vessin guy. He's a species of bug that basically injects you with this saliva that will kill you. It's a very lethal thing. It's supposed to kill you very peacefully, though. So basically, it's meant for Vessin that have dementia, because people with dementia, as in this particular case with the older lady, can vogue, and it's how they make sure that someone with those same conditions doesn't, expose Vessins, because in this particular case, Mason saw what he saw. So that's one particular case. Even Monroe and Rosalie point out the fact that, like, oh yeah, like, we both set it up for that too. And even Hank was like, really? He's like, yeah, it's kind of common thing amongst the Vessin world. I don't think that's ever come up before. So it's like a little nice thing to kind of, obviously we're winding down to the series and everything, but it's kind of a nice thing to just kind of add it. It's kind of like the darker side to like the Vessin world. I mean, obviously the Vessin world already has a darker side to it, but it was just something I don't think that's ever come up before. And I was just kind of like, wow. So it's bad enough dementia at having it as a human, but it's even worse for being a Vessin, because you could mess around and hurt someone, or even up exposing, Vessin to the world. So that's why I'm saying, like, it's a very somber episode because of that, like, grounded realism. Because what they ended up finding out is that the person connected all these murders that were happening, at least these two particular murders, was the lady that visited the shop earlier in the episode, her husband. She basically wanted to try and keep it under control, but sadly, I think it was a situation where she couldn't call the guy to come get her husband, to do the same thing to her husband, to put in arrest, because she didn't want to let him go, because she loved him too much. And so she probably thought she could handle it on her own, keep him under control, keep his dementia under control where she didn't have to worry about it, but he would wander off, and because he was confused and everything, he ended up killing these people. And so it's a situation where it's like, even Nick and Hank were kind of like, they can't arrest him because there's no telling if he might vogue, and not only exposing Vessin, but he might kill someone else in the process. Plus, it's like there's no way they get a conviction anyway, so they just let the guy, who it turns out to be the doctor that was connected to this nursing home or whatever to begin with. And so he did what he needed to do to put the man to rest. And it's just, like I said, it was a little too realistic. Like, I'll kind of add in the fact is I've kind of had slight experience with that, like someone not really being all there in their head, kind of forgetting where they are, just like losing track of time, stuff like that. And I don't know, that's why it kind of was like, I don't know, especially seeing his wife like that, like she tried so hard to keep him hidden just to make sure, because she thought she could keep it under control, but, you know, I mean, it was the best option out of the entire situation. And it was also another situation, too, that I feel like it never really came up a lot in the series, because more often than not, when it came to like criminal situations with Vesson, usually it'd be like, okay, we've got that set. It's usually clear cut. But in this case with Mason, he did act out of self-defense. And it's like, yeah, the reports show that she didn't die from him defending himself, but it is still a situation where he could be charged with assault because, you know, he defended himself. Because it's like, no one would believe that some 91-year-old woman was, you know, attacking him. So they're getting the Godfather of Death to be like, oh no, like if things came up, obviously he'll be there to kind of be there for Mason's defense because he could go to jail for something like this. So I feel like you never really see that too much, because more often than not, the clear-cut bad guy in the episodes tend to be like a Vesson. So either that person is like outright killed or the situation is solved. More often than not, when you actually think about it, most Vesson-related cases in this series, most end with the Vesson in particular being killed. It's kind of interesting because Nick isn't your typical Grimm just going around killing. He tries to find all different ways of handling that situation. It doesn't always work out, but still, it was just kind of, to me, it was kind of a very different approach. Like I said, just overall, the episode was just different all around, and I thought that was just kind of interesting. But some other elements that popped up in the episode is we have Eve going to Adeline asking for help with this whole circumstance of like, she's basically got the mentality of, hey, let's get that thing before it gets us. And she's kind of bringing up good points. The fact of the matter is, it might be after me, might be after Nick. The fact of the matter is, it might even be after Diana, because she can see the symbols just like I can. So maybe that's why this thing is after us. So Adeline's reluctantly helping. She's like, I don't want you to kind of do this on your own. She even tells Nick. Nick checks in on Eve, and it's like, yo, I want to make sure you're okay. She's like, thank you for checking on me. It's like, yeah, no problem. Which immediately gets my mind start racing about different things, like the whole, I'm bringing it back, like, obviously, as I already said earlier, I think I brought it up last week, and I think I was wrong. I was thinking, like, this would be the third to last episode, this was the fourth to last episode, now there are only 3 episodes left. I caught little glimpses of the next episode. It's leaning toward that thought I throughout the entire episode, because you have the situation of, like, that little awkwardness between Eve and Nick, and it's that situation of like, I don't know what I want. I kind of want him to stay with Adeline, but I get the feeling it's going to be a situation where he goes back to like Eve, because she is becoming more Juliet, and obviously those feelings are springing back up because they are weird and awkward around each other, and it's just like, I don't know, man. I feel like he cared. I mean, I don't think Nick ever really cared too much about Eve before, but now it's that he's seeing her change. He sees her turning back into Juliet, so it just makes things a little awkward. Because it's like, I brought it up before. I've said it. I just even did a video recently that I think I might have referenced in a different Grimm video, Grimm podcast or whatever. Was the fact is that I brought it up in a video I did about 5 of my favorite fictional couples, and one of them was Nick and Adeline. And I was like, certain developments seem like that. I've been bringing it up every other podcast. Every podcast related to Grimm basically being like, yo, like the fact is things are changing with Juliet, and I'm sure that's going to turn into a whole love triangle situation with Nick. And like, I'm so conflicted because it's like, obviously Juliet and Nick were there at the beginning, but it's like Adeline and Nick are the relationship I didn't know I wanted. And it's like, you're so cute and adorable together. It's like enemies that came together. I just hope it lasts, and I don't know if it will, especially with things turning away. I mean, like I said, there are 3 more episodes for everything to get flipped upside down. So, but the fact of the matter is, Eve's promised that she wasn't going to do things on her own, but she didn't. She still kind of does things on her own because Nick is like, "Girl, we're kind of all in this together." But Eve doesn't necessarily listen, so she even looks into one of Adeline's mom's books, which I like the fact is how it works. That basically letters were scrambled, and so she had to shake the book to kind of get the letters to rearrange and stuff like that. And so she starts thinking about all these different ways to kind of get in contact with that other world, and so she starts thinking about blood currency, as a means, which you have Adeline being like, don't do that. That's very dangerous. Like, obviously in the whole magic scheme of things is like, you don't want to be a little more careful with what you do because you don't, because even Adeline herself isn't that familiar. It's like the only person that would know more about this whole situation would be her mom, but her mom's obviously long since dead. So I don't think, because there's not too many other remaining Hexen bees in this show. Like any other Hexen beasts that have popped up before. I forget, I can never remember the actress's name. It was a couple seasons back, but it was the actress who played Fancy on Jamie Foxx. She's like one of the few other Hexen beasts that's popped up in the show that I'm slightly familiar with. I mean, granted, she died a while back too, so. But nevertheless, we do see Eve at the end of the episode using the mirror, and the portal kind of opens and she steps through. I'm like, what did Nick say? Don't do stuff by yourself. Like, that's why all of you are in this together, which everyone's super nervous because Monroe and Rosalie are putting up those, covering up all the mirrors. It's like, okay, so is it just that particular mirrors, or is it all mirrors? What do we do if it doesn't work just on mirrors? What if it's reflections too? What if Eve just happens to walk down the street one day, catch her reflection? Does that mean the monster can get her then? So, which is a good question. So far, it does seem like it's only allocated to mirrors, but in those two particular cases of the mirror, it hasn't popped up to anyone else but Eve and Nick. And it's only popped up to Eve like twice now, so I'm very interested to see how that all plays out. Especially since she's in there by herself. Obviously, like I said, I saw next week's episode. I won't go into too much detail about what I saw, but looks very interesting. Like I said, things are winding down. I have no idea how this is all going to play out, what this all means, like what this thing coming means, like what that's all about. But on the other side of things, we do have Sean being like, talking to Adeline. It's like, yeah, I know about the drawings. What about this? Tell me about the tunnel. And she's like, because, Adeline, even she like can admit, like, I don't know much that's going on. Like, none of them know. And so she's like, okay, you want to know about the tunnel? Talk to Nick. Then he talks to Nick, and Nick's like, okay, I'll tell you if you tell me something, which that's where that left off. But I don't know. I'm very interested to see that all come. I feel like they're going to reluctantly bring Sean in on it. Like I said, it's so interesting because it's like, I'm glad things turned out the way they did, that Sean is 100. Like, I'm guessing those are things that are never going to get 100% settled, because it seems like the main focus is these storylines, because the organization that Trouble is part of, not unless that kind of ties in at the end of the episode, or Black Claw, all that's kind of gone away now. I mean, both of them, those organizations no longer exist within Portland. Obviously, those main Portland-based version groups are both wiped out. So, and now that Sean's kind of left them all behind too. So now, I don't know. The story didn't go the direction I was thinking it was going to go. I felt like it was going to end with Sean being a bad guy. I was hoping it wouldn't. I hope he'd have a turnaround, which he did. So I was hoping for it. I just didn't think I'd get what I was hoping for. But now we have Sean obviously digging deeper and deeper into this whole situation, and Eve off on her own. I will admit to you, kind of going back to the main thread of the episode, I was thinking the old guy. I was like, the moment like Wu pointed out, it's like, oh yes, this old guy. I was like, oh, is that the old guy from the hotel? Because I guess that turned out to be nothing. I guess it's just like that tree thing from last episode. It's like, oh, it could be something, but this is the final season, so it's nothing. It's like something that Nick and the group will may have to deal with. Obviously, like when the series is all said and done, there's always to think of like, oh, where would the story go afterwards? So it's probably something like when it's all said and done, that's something that they kind of have to deal with later on, that we as an audience just won't get to experience or something like that. But I was thinking it was the guy from the hotel, the one where that thing was basically getting people in their sleep and making it impossible for them to sleep. That thing where the guy was in a wheelchair laughing like when the monster finally dead. He was like, ha ha ha, and he turned into a vest. I was thinking it was him, but like I said, it turned out to be something else entirely. So Like I said, it's a very good episode, but like I said, it was also very kind of somber in the sense of just the overall story element and what it meant. So, but it was also an interesting episode in that retrospect too, just because it was just kind of. I feel like I don't know. I've never. I mean, I know Nick and Hank have handled cases similarly in the past, like tried to take a different approach. But in this particular, I feel like they've never really taken this approach to a case before. I mean, obviously they know Mason didn't do any wrong, and they're just trying to help him out the best they can. So that had to be tough for Rosalie and Monroe to kind of look at, like that couple, like having to, like her having to see her husband like that, like they were there to support her and everything. But I'm very interested, like because it's like especially because they want to do that for each other if the time comes, and it's just like it's a situation where you hope it doesn't come to that. I mean, granted, it's a peaceful way, but still, that means the reason why it happens is because of dementia, and it's like you don't want that on anyone, dude, because that thing sucks ass, dude. Like not being like I'm sure that's a fear a lot of people have. It's such a scary condition to be and not be 100% in your right mindset. But there was a moment where he was like. She's like, okay, you're just gonna go to sleep, and she's like, it's gonna be okay, and he's like, it's okay, Elizabeth, like saying her name because the entire time he was looking for, and when he came home originally, he was like, he didn't know who she was, and it's like in that one moment, like he kind of snapped back to her and realized who she was, so she kind of got her husband a little bit back before the end, so. I don't know whether that makes it better or worse. I mean, I think overall, I like to think it like to make it better, but maybe someone else might see it as worse. Like I said, it's just, I don't know, a little depressing, so I'm just kind of going to end that there. I'm kind of glad this is the last, well, technically it's still not the last one after, at least for Super-Fanta-Fi wise, I'm glad this is the last one I'm recording because it's so somber, so, but yeah, like I said, that's all I want to talk about. I really cannot wait to see what goes on with this whole situation in these next coming 3 episodes. I mean, that's the thing. It's 3 episodes, so a lot yet. I mean, it really comes down to where they take in the story. Like, I think with these last 3 episodes, there won't be any cases. I think it'll be pure on like main story. Like, we're like full on sprinting to the end is how I'm seeing it. So. And now moving on to this week's episode of Sleepy Hollow. A very good episode where we have obviously the main thread episode being that hunger demon. I don't think they ever really specified what specific hunger demon it was because apparently there's like a shit ton of hunger demons out there. But this one in particular is one that was sealed within a special puzzle box that actually is something that Crane actually has some experience with because he actually came across like a guy in his past. This is before he joined the colonial side of the war, when he was still with the British Army and everything. There was a guy he met named Edward Reed. Basically, he found the box and was kind of enamored with it, and then basically him as well as like a platoon or whatever he was with all ended up starving to death or whatever. So it seems like this thing was the cause of that, because apparently these hunger demons seem to have been like the reason why like a lot of stuff back in the day, like a lot of famines and stuff like that happened, were because of these particular hunger demons, because they work very interestingly that basically they fill you with this need of hunger. Like in particular, like the first victim, he just kept eating and then all of a sudden he passes out, but it looks like his body's like malnourished. It looks like just he literally starved to death. Then there's the other lady that she's the assistant secretary, I think her name was Stryker, that Diana was talking to earlier in the episode about the whole Dreyfus situation. That we saw her literally eating a guy. It seems like that was the only case of cannibalism amongst the ones, because like obviously those were the only 2 victims of the episode. But apparently this thing is also connected to the gold rush too that happened here in the U.S. Mainly because like gold ends up supposedly being its weakness, hence like the symbols on the box. Because a big part of this episode is also about, in this particular case, as like a whole system of like working together as a team. As obviously this group has worked together as a team before, but what makes it even like, this is like another striking moment. Like obviously that was a big focus of it. And when this monster was dealt with, everyone came together to beat this thing. I did like that information that, I wonder how true is that, that there's always a little bit of gold in different parts of a car. The fact is that, Jenny knows it well. She's like, oh yeah, there's a friend of mine who used to kind of take apart a specific, steal gold from certain parts of a car just for the sake of beer money. And Crane's like, oh yeah, a friend, you say? Huh? And then Jenny kind of looks away because she knows Crane kind of figured it out. But it's a situation where the team was almost a little divided because you had the whole situation with Diana, because Diana's pissed because obviously Alex and Jake told her about what they found out about like Dreyfus targeting Molly specifically. Now, Diana tried to go about it in a more legal route. Obviously, her and the team are handling things on the supernatural front, but in this particular case, she tried to go about it the more legal front with the assistant secretary, which apparently her and Diana have a connection. And brought up the whole conversation of like quotas. The fact is that she's kind of sleeping behind her work, because that's something that never really came up with Abby. But I'm like, that's got to be affecting your work, because a lot of your cases that you take on, you can't necessarily solve them because it's like you solved them with the team. Obviously, in this case, the Vault team, but it's not like Diana can really bring up like all the stuff that comes up. It does make you wonder which Abby, well, Reynolds didn't find out till like closer to the end of things. So, but even then, it's like maybe he was able to kind of cover her tracks a little bit more when it came to older cases. Because it's like, yeah, that had a supernatural spin to it. Yeah, that had a supernatural. Let me just kind of work my way around it. But in this particular situation, I'm surprised that hasn't come up more. It's like, oh, the fact that you're not doing your job well enough. It's like, actually, I'm doing my job a lot. It's just I can't report on everything I'm doing because she's like, oh, I know my quota's kind of been going down and stuff like. But that wasn't the main conversation. Obviously, she wants to go after Dreyfus. She's like, yo, things are a little suspicious. Obviously, the assistant secretary is like, no, we can't do that. She's like, obviously, I can see you're coming after the dude you're coming after Dreyfus very personally, and you have blinders on and everything, which she has the right to come after him. Like, I mean, it's like, we know he's a bad guy. She just can't legally, there's not enough stuff to really bring up, proving that he's necessarily behind 100% of everything. But that's also a situation too, kind of, she was right, because the fact is Diana does have blinders on. Because the situation is that Crane is like, hey, I know you're mad and everything, you have the right to be, but let's deal with this situation with this famine demon first, then we'll go after Dreyfus, because she's so focused on like, yo, she even says it like, we're dealing with the symptoms when we should be dealing with the exact disease, that being Dreyfus. I think I keep saying that literally a different way every time. But nevertheless, she even had Alex and Jake kind of handling that on the side. It was something that she didn't want anyone else to know, because it was a situation like she was so focused on wanting to take Dreyfus down. It's like, okay, we separate our forces and do different things, which, Crane is like, I don't mind the fact is that you had them doing that, trying to do what you said, kind of come at it from two different points. What I appreciate is the fact is that you didn't inform the rest of us, me and Jenny, about this whole circumstance. And then she apologizes. Crane's like, the fact of the matter is you had the right to be mad. He came after your daughter personally. Obviously, everyone still doesn't know about the whole conversation Molly and Dreyfus had. But nevertheless, it's a situation which you would think maybe Diana's still kind of in that mode where she doesn't 100% tell Molly everything. So she probably hasn't wondered necessarily about Dreyfus. I mean, maybe she has, but Molly probably still hasn't said anything because there's a part of her that doesn't want to. But nevertheless, it's a situation where they have to all be on the same page, because once, like I said, the whole part of this episode is also about being a stronger team. And so you need to be always on the same page so that you're never really caught off guard by anything. Like, in this particular episode, like obviously she was talking to Alex and Jake, so she wasn't focused on actually seeing the, hunger demon, that when it was kind of near her, she would have noticed if she wasn't on the phone. At least that's how she looks at it. So it's like, okay, we're putting that aside from now on, going to be 100% honest with each other and working together. Kind of bouncing all over the place. I'm going to go ahead and talk about it, because it's something I was literally thinking about before I started recording. But the fact of the matter is, I guessed it right. Dreyfus is coming up with his own team of the four horsemen, because earlier, when obviously the recruit situation, I was like, wait, he didn't ever put an exact number on it. I was like, but from the moment that whole Logan thing happened, I was like, is he creating his own four horsemen? And then especially in this episode with his CFO, whatever, the lady that used to work with his business, Helen, he talks to her about bringing her into the fold. Obviously not directly bringing her up the part, like, bringing everything up to her, but he's like, oh, the fact is you had this like almost famine need to reach out and get stuff. I was like, the moment he mentions like, yeah, you're creating the four horsemen, even more so when he talks to Death later on the Horsemen of Death, and it's like, oh, the fact of the matter is, we'll get you straight back up, because the last time we saw him, he did get kind of messed up by Crane, because he was in that near the Philosopher's Stone and everything, so it weakened him, so that Crane could hurt him, so he's in a very weakened state, which they're trying to heal him up and everything. But he's like, oh, don't worry, we're getting the band back together. And then I was like, he's definitely creating it literally cemented it in my mind then and there. Like, yep, he's definitely creating them. Now, obviously, he has Logan as Pestilence. He has Helen as Famine. Hopefully, he can probably get the Horseman of Death to obviously reprise his role of Death. But he's like, oh, the fact of the matter is, I'm missing one of War. Now, obviously, my brain immediately was like, oh yeah, Joe or I doubt Dreyfus himself is going. He's going to be the leader of it also. Maybe Joe. Which, interestingly enough, we actually got to see a little bit of what Joe looks like in his demon form. Because, obviously, he was going through the x-ray and the security guard looked at it and there was, like, horns all over his body. Not all over, but not just on this particular head. But you can see it, like, under, like you can see it through the x-ray machine. You can see the spikes throughout his body, so I was like, oh, maybe Joe. But then it clicked in my head, like, literally moments before I started recording. It's like, what if it turns out that he makes Molly the Horseman of War? That would be the perfect fit on multiple levels. Not only is she a witness, and I think that would just add more to it, because as we know, Molly kind of has her, like, anger issues. Not like, like any kid was, because, like, in her particular situation, she keeps a lot of stuff bottled up. She wants to be a lot more. That would also explain the whole reason why her and Dreyfus are necessarily working together, because he brought her back as the Horseman of War. But it also fit, because it fit the dynamic of who the previous Horseman of War was, Henry. So, child having problems with their parent, like, obviously, Molly fits that bill with Diana, just as Henry fit that bill with Crane. Because there's always been that conversation of, like, Crane is like, yeah, you shouldn't do this, and that. He's like, I made a mistake with my son. And the fact is they keep drawing those parallels. I'm like, that would be the perfect fit, just because I think that'd be something you wouldn't necessarily see coming. I mean, granted, like I said, it could easily be Joe or someone else, but I feel like Molly would be the perfect candidate. I just think it'd be the perfect fit. I think it'd make things interesting, especially because I feel like Logan could be there to also ease her into it, because apparently, obviously, she's a big fan of Logan, so it's like Dreyfus already has her in that regard, but also because he's there being like, oh, talking into air, saying this and that, so I don't know, man. That's where my mindset is currently at about that. If it turns out to not be the case, I will actually be surprised, because I'm like, that feels like such the obvious route to go with that Molly be the Horseman of War. It'd be so interesting. Plus, like, she's so young and everything, and imagining her as the Horseman of War just kind of blows my mind. But it's like, I think it'd be that more, like, for story purposes wise, that'd be amazing, because it has to be like Diana trying her best to bring her daughter back, save her daughter from this life. I mean, granted, like I brought up before, like, as we've seen Molly and Dreyfus, and we know where Crane is, but we don't know where the rest of the team is, where Jenny, where Diana, where Jake, and or Alex is during that whole situation where we see in the future. Like, because that's another thing too. Molly wasn't that old in that situation. Dreyfus, it makes sense. He's not, he's immortal now, so obviously he wouldn't age. Crane was super old in that, but Molly was still a kid, so even more, it sets it in stone there. Like, obviously something happened to keep her in a young state, and it's like, obviously becoming a horseman obviously adds a little taste of immortality to everything, so I don't know, dude. I'm super excited to see, like, where that goes about, like, how they go about getting her to become, the Horseman of War. Like I said, I'm so certain that's going to be it. I'm going to be really surprised if it turns out not to be the case. I'm dead certain on it now, so, dude. Oh, that's super exciting to see that, like, if that would come about, so. But another part of this episode is the whole concept of home. Obviously, we had the whole thing about teamwork and everything, but now it's also the thoughts of home, because you had Crane throwing that housewarming party at the beginning where, like, a crap ton of people showed up, and even Jenny was like, yeah, you would have never thought about doing something like this in Sleepy Hollow. It's like he never did, because I brought it up before, like, he never actually made that many friends. There was, like, you can literally count on one hand the people outside of that main group that he ever became friends with. Obviously, there was a lady, I think she was a librarian, wasn't she? The one he was dating last season for a little bit, until, like, obviously there was hitches here and there in their relationship and everything. But other than her, there weren't that many people. No, there was a lady that Crane did kind of get close to. He befriended. That she was kind of into colonial stuff, but she ended up becoming a victim later on in episode, like, I can't remember if that was season 3 or was that like season 2 or something, but there was a lady that he was friends with too, but she ended up becoming a victim of one of the monsters he were dealing with, so. But like I said, still, he didn't really branch out that much, so in this episode, it's very interesting to see him have all those different people, and Jenny kind of brings up the fact is like, oh, it's become like a home to you, and I guess for Crane, he had not really thought about it, because it's like, he'd kind of set roots in Sleepy Hollow because that had become his home for so long, and now it's a situation of like, I guess it is because like this is the new life he's kind of built for himself, and he even says that later on to Diana. He's like he owes it to her and Molly because they've been so welcoming to him about this whole circumstances. They've been there to help him. Which she's like, yeah, you've helped give us purpose too. I mean, we're out saving the world by fighting monsters. I mean, it's not a job we would have likely signed up willingly for, but still, nevertheless, it's our job now. So. But it obviously isn't 100% said for Jenny because, you know, you have Crane almost being like, oh, why don't you move into the building too? There's a vacant place you could stay for a little while. She's like, but for Jenny, she's like kind of more of like, hey, being on the road is kind of where it's like, I like it here and everything, but it's not somewhere I'd really stay. He's like, oh, go back to Sleepy Hollow. And she's like, no, staying in Sleepy Hollow was like a fluke. The only reason why she stayed in Sleepy Hollow was just because of the whole supernatural world. I'm sure her work and mainly kind of being locked up in that, asylum for a while for everyone thinking she was crazy. That plus, you know, Abby was there. You know, her and Abby were fixing things. They got better, so it's like that was more reason to stay. You know, with her sister. But now that Abby's going, it's like there's nothing left in Sleepy Hollow for her. Plus, Joe's going to extra reason why not to go back to Sleepy Hollow. So she's not really. For her, I mean, it's understandable because when it comes to Jenny's life, just the way life has always been, she's kind of had to handle things on her own, so she's always been on the move. Obviously, she had, like, Corbin when she was younger, kind of being a mentor for her and everything, but it still was a situation where she kind of had to learn to kind of survive on her own, so being tied down to one place doesn't necessarily fit her that well. Because she even tells Crane about the dude she meet, her contact in this episode, Donnie. He brings up the fact is that there's an artifact, you know, kind of doing the whole thing she used to do before, kind of tracking down artifacts. He's like, oh, you could have your own team and everything. And for Jenny, it's about doing her own thing. Obviously, this is part of the battle of good versus evil, which she's happy to help out, but it's like she also needs something for herself because at least outside of this, Diana has worked to a certain degree that kind of helps her with this. And I'm sure Jake and Alice are kind of the same way too. And Crane has his own things outside of, you know, I mean, history's kind of his thing outside of it. I mean, but really that still technically counts. But it's like Jenny wants something to kind of call her own, you know. So she's kind of interested in Josh. She hasn't 100% said yes, but it's a situation where you think, you know, Crane is like, you know, the fact is I like to think of you as family. She's like, oh, come on, Crane, don't make this weird. You're making this weird. He's like, I'm not making it. Just if you let me finish. He's basically saying like, you have more family. You know, you do have more of a home than you like to give yourself credit for. Like the fact is that you are like family to me. You know, Crane's legitimate just saying like, don't go because I'd miss having you around because you are just as much family to me as anyone else. You know, that's why he was so excited to have her here with him just because he didn't think, you know, especially when he lost Abby, you know, still having Jenny around, I'm sure it's like, it makes it, that emptiness, that missing piece to both of them a little less. It lessens it a little bit. I'm not saying it lessens it a lot. It doesn't ease everything about Abby being gone, but it makes it easier being around each other. At least that's how I look at it, so. It's going to be interesting to see what Jenny decides to do going forward. And then the little thing I'll add in is talking about the whole Jake and Alex situation. Obviously, Missy and Jake kind of have the bartender, Missy. And then the fact is that Alex sees her and it's like, like kind of that face. And you even see Jenny kind of sing it a little bit and offers Alex about a beer. And she's like, thanks. And the fact is that Alex is acting a little funny. He's like, oh yeah, because she's even talking to Jake and be like, yeah, you shouldn't, you know, be careful because it's like, oh, you two got so much in common, right? Well, you know, people who have too much in common tend to like break up and stuff like that. And he's like, wait, you said the exact opposite about me and Jenny. And then she kind of was like, well, oh, there's that lady. And then also like, obviously they were trailing that lady, Ashley, who was Dreyfus's assistant, and seeing him like chalk up a conversation, you see it bothering her. It's like, I was like, wow, I wasn't expect because like I said before, I couldn't tell. It seemed like there might be something there, but I wasn't sure if it was just a situation of like, I think a life and death situation kind of put it a little more in perspective for her to be like, oh, I kind of, like, it makes you wonder, like, maybe that's why she, like, was always cool with the idea of, like, oh, let's double date together, like, to be there for each other, you know, because it makes you wonder, has she always had feelings for Jake, you know? It's a situation where it seems like Jake's, like, obviously they have that little flirtatious thing where Jake's like, oh, you call me, oh, that puppy dog charm of mine. She's like, no. He's like, oh, that sounded like a compliment. She's like, no, I compared you to a doll. It's like, no, what I heard was the charming part. You think I'm charming. So, but like I said, it's a situation where It's definitely going to be interesting. I want them together. I already paired them together before I was 100% sure, just because I saw a little twinkle or something there, and it seems like it is a thing. I mean, granted, it seems like Jake's completely oblivious to it, because I appreciate those type of things, because to me, it makes it that much more impactful when it does happen. It's like, wait, you actually like me? I didn't know this was possibly a thing. I guess because of my own experiences with romance and being oblivious to girls liking me, because I'm in my own head of it, like, oh, I guess because it's also because him and Alex have been friends for so long, so to him, he probably can't see beyond that, because it's just like, yo, Alex is someone I care about deeply, but it's like, yo, she doesn't feel that way about me. There's no way. And that's at least how I chalk it up. So that is something I'm also going to be looking forward to going forward. And also the fact is, I brought it up earlier, the whole Horsemen situation. We do have the team now being like, oh crap, they're bringing together Horsemen, creating Horsemen of their own. So it's going to be very interesting. I can't wait till everyone gets revealed. Like, oh man, Logan's one, because they know he's making them, but they don't know like what human candidates he's chosen. And I'm very interested to see what their powers are, because that's something I've always wanted when it came to this show, was the other Horsemen, because it's like, we dealt with death and we dealt with war. Pestilence and famine never popped up. So I guess because they never really had a human counterpart. So I guess this is their way to kind of have that back, so like I said, it's just going to be very interesting going forward. So I'm very excited to see what goes down in the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.